Hello and welcome, or welcome back to the Import Export Hub channel, everyone. Bogdan here, your biased host for the next couple of minutes. Thanks for joining me, by the way. I hope that you are all doing great. And guys, without losing too much precious time here with lengthy introductions, allow me to cover Uruguay's export dynamics with a focus on the top 20 headings that had the largest absolute changes in 2024 relative to the previous year. And I will cover both the positive and negative changes, while towards the end of this video, I will cover Uruguay's top 20 headings that had the smallest variability for the 2020-2024 timeframe, with the coefficient of variation as a proxy, if you want, in measuring this, which should tell us a couple of sectors where Uruguay has a comparative advantage when it comes to its exports, but more on this in a couple of minutes. So guys, first things first, in terms of the largest absolute positive changes, on the first spot we see here soybeans, so heading 1201, who had an yearly change of some $792 million and an overall export figure for 2024 around $1.2 billion. Wood follows with almost $163 million positive change, while motor vehicles for the transport of goods and the podium, let's say, with a positive change of some $139 million and an overall export figure around $424 million. And then the list goes on with, I don't know, wheat, for example, who saw an absolute positive change of some $110 million. Live bovine animals is next with some $67 million change. Barley, for example, is also here, so heading 1003 with a positive change of some $29 million, while towards the end of this top 20 list, we see wood sawn or chipped, so heading 4407 with some $12 million positive change. Seeds, fruits, and spores for sowing sits on the 19th spot with a positive change of $10.4 million, while heading 0504, so we are talking about guts and bladders of animals, and ends this top 20 list with a change of some $8.5 million and an overall export figure around $51.7 million. So now that we've passed through this information relatively quickly, what insights can we squeeze out? If we're looking at the summary chart here, we see that we have a lot of unique chapters, meaning that Uruguay's export performers for 2024 at least came from many industries, more or less interrelated. But two particular clusters stand out, both in terms of cumulative export figures and the number of headings. And the first one concerns Chapter 10, which covers cereals. In this case, we're talking about wheat, barley, and maize. So three headings, basically, with a cumulative value of the exports around $470 million. And the second cluster concerns chapters 12 and 44. Chapter 12 stands for oilseeds, while chapter 44 covers wood products. And as we can see together here, the former had a cumulative value of the exports of some $1.2 billion, while the latter had a slightly smaller value of $1.16 billion. So definitely important, these two particular clusters. While for the rest of the chapters, chapter 87, so motor vehicles, comes close with some $423 million worth of exports from just one heading, 8704, so vehicles for the transport of goods, as I was saying previously, and most probably Stellantis group contributed a lot to this performance. It's just an educated guess to make, guys, so take this info with a pinch of salt. Anyways, let's take a look now at another indicator that I like to follow, and that's the compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years. And if we're looking at the column, we don't see any negative figures, guys, which is quite good. But if I were to pick some sectors where Uruguay has the potential, if you want to increase the exports, I will go with the headings highlighted in yellow. So live bovine animals is one, meat of bovine animals, fresh or chilled. Precious and semi-precious stones looks pretty interesting also. The butter heading is also promising with a 9.55% compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years. And another one would concern the cocoa powder heading, who has a compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years around 20%, even though in terms of absolute export values, it's only around $23 million yearly, but definitely on an upward trend. And guys, I didn't include here the soya, wheat, and wood headings, but these two have a good potential to keep up the good figures, especially the soya heading, given the current geopolitical frictions between the United States and China, which could place Uruguay, if he's playing its cards right, in a good position and capturing a share of the US market share in China. So, guys, these were Uruguay's top 20 absolute positive headings, and now I'll take a look at the top 20 negative performers in 2024. And on the first spot, so the largest absolute negative change was registered by heading 1205. So we are talking about rape or colza seeds, who saw contraction of some $151 million. On the second spot, we see meat of bovine animals. This time we're talking about frozen meat. So heading 0202, who had a negative change of some $72 million. And finishing the podium, we find heading 4401, so fuel wood, with a contraction of almost $55 million and an overall export figure close to $112 million. And then the list goes on with, I don't know, malt, for example, who had a contraction of some $50 million. What else do we see? We have frozen fish with almost $30 million negative change. Mollusks follows with some $25.5 million contraction. Well, towards the end of this top 20 list, we see cheese and curd with some $10 million contraction. Edible offal follows on the 19th spot with almost $9 million contraction. While on the 20th spot, we see heading 1901, so malt extract, food preparations, and the like, with some $6.4 million contraction and some $41.5 million overall exports in 2024. And again, following the example from the previous sheet, guys, let's see what insights can we squeeze out of this information. Well, looking at the summary chart, we see again a lot of unique chapters, so quite diverse sectors affected by contractions in this list. But as we can clearly see here from both a value and number of headings point of view, Chapter 2, so meat was the most affected, as on the one hand, we have the largest amount of cumulative exports for 2024, close to $1.8 billion, and on the other hand, we have here the largest number of headings, so 3 headings in this chapter, which if we look at the table, we might be inclined to think that meat processors and exporters in Uruguay are having problems. But if we look at the compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years, things are not that bad. And if we look closely enough, only the meat of sheep or goats chapter heading had a negative compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years, some 4%. So not at all worrying, if you ask me. But this is not the case, guys, for headings like frozen fish and mollusks, which are having important contractions. So I would be very, very careful if I was working in these particular sectors. And the same holds true for the citrus fruit sector, who had a negative compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years around 7%. Otherwise, Even though we're talking here about yearly contractions, the overall structure for these particular headings, it's not worrying. So guys, I will move now to my last sheet, in which I will cover Uruguay's top 20 headings that had the smallest variability for the 2020-2024 timeframe, using the coefficient of variation as a proxy measuring or attempting to measure Uruguay's comparative advantage or advantages. This top 20 list is sorted according to the coefficient of variation from the smallest to the largest values, and I've included only the headings that in 2024 had exports of at least $1 million. And as we can see together here, the smallest coefficient of variation was registered by heading 0406, so cheese and curd, with a coefficient of variation of 0.0337. Wine comes on the second place. I wouldn't have expected. I didn't knew that Uruguay is a wine exporter. But anyways, playing and experimenting with trade data, you're learning things every day. On the third spot, we see articles of apparel with a coefficient of variation of 0.0703 and an overall export figure for 2024 of a modest $1.1 million. And then the list goes on with non-wovens. Sulfates is also present here with a coefficient of variation of 0.0112. Enzymes is more or less at the middle of this list, while towards the end of this list we see albumins, so heading 3502, with a coefficient of variation of 0.1297. Cartons, boxes, and the like sits on the 19th spot with a coefficient of variation of 0.1318, while tanned or dressed fur skins, heading 4302, ends this top 20 list with a coefficient of variation of 0.133 and an overall export value close to $3.7 million. So guys, have we identified the sector or the sectors where Uruguay has a comparative slash competitive advantage? Well, I argue that we've captured it pretty well, and we're speaking here about the dairy produce sector, so chapter 4, which has both the largest number of headings and the largest cumulative export value for 2024. And to be more precise, we're talking about cheese and curd way, heading 0404, and the third and the last heading involves the milk and cream heading, which has also the largest exported value from this top 20 list. So yeah, from these top 20 headings, I can confidently say that Uruguay has a strong comparative advantage in the dairy sector. As for the other clusters, where we see two headings in each chapter, from an export point of view, only chapter 15 is impressive, as we see some $109 million worth of exports. And this chapter is highly correlated with the dairy sector, as we're talking about margarine. So yeah, it makes sense really to add value locally and export the finished product, in this case margarine. And another chapter that could highlight a potential export driver is chapter 30, so pharmaceutical products, who had a relatively small but not negligible compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years. So yes, I would say that this sector could take part in Uruguay's export performance in the next couple of years. And guys, with this being said, my job here for today is done. Thanks for watching. I really hope you've liked it. Thank me by pushing and clicking those small vanity buttons. And as usual, until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.